Okay, good evening. Welcome to the Ocean View School District Parent Night. We have with us tonight Paulina Digatori, our program specialist for tobacco prevention, and Stephen Lambert, coordinator for prevention education, both from the Orange County Department of Education. And they're going to provide you information tonight on vaping, the associated risks of vaping, and then how we can assist our students with preventing vaping use. Tonight's session is being recorded. And again, there is translation available. If you follow the instructions that are on the screen, Spanish and Vietnamese interpretation are both available tonight. So I think we are ready to go. I'm going to turn it over to our experts, to Stephen and Paulina. Thank you so much.
All righty. Thank you so much, Barb, and thank you to everybody for taking some time out from your evening to join us to learn about something that's very important that we feel for the young people in your lives, and that is to talk a bit about vaping prevention. As Barb had mentioned, my name is Stephen Lambert, and I'm the prevention coordinator at OCDE, and with me is Paulina.
Hello, everyone.
And what we're going to do first is run down a little bit for you what else is going on here in the district around tobacco prevention, just to bring you all into the loop. And then I'm going to turn it over to Paulina, who's going to really jump into the meat of the content. So we're here representing OCDE and our tobacco prevention programs. And in particular, I'm representing the Tobacco Use Prevention Education Program. And this is a grant-funded program we are partnering here with Ocean View School District to provide a number of services for the students and for you all as families in Ocean View. And a few of the different things that are going on with the students at the middle school level is they're receiving the Catch My Breath Vaping Prevention Curriculum, which is a fantastic resource for the young people in your lives to learn about the risks of vaping and how to deal with peer pressure and make healthy decisions around vaping. Also providing some guidance around intervention for students who are maybe starting to experiment and need a little support in guiding healthy choices. Cessation services, both for students who are looking to quit smoking and vaping, as well as for you all and for the adults, staff, parents, family members here in Ocean View and in Orange County. And Paulina is going to talk a bit more about those resources later. And then youth development projects, which are really utilizing student leadership, students who are creating their own vaping prevention projects on campus with their teachers and classmates. And then finally, family engagement. So things like we're doing tonight to really get the word out so that we're all on the same page on how to assist young people in making healthy decisions around tobacco use. Next slide, please. Just a little bit more about those youth development projects briefly. This can take many different forms, but some of the opportunities that your young people will have to engage in as part of these projects will be things like service learning. So activities like park and beach cleanups, in which we're targeting a tobacco litter and discussing the impact that tobacco waste has on the environment. Peer-to-peer education, where students actually educate one another on tobacco and vaping related issues. Media literacy, where young people create their own media campaigns and artwork to support healthy choices and counter the influence of the tobacco industry. Youth advocacy projects as well to explore in the greater community to see how we can make an impact there. And sting operations are occurring at the high school level, not so much here at the middle school level. But those will be opportunities as the students continue to grow and partner with some of our other community organizations. And so these are some of the activities that young people have an opportunity to participate in to really grow and expand their learning and participate as advocates for healthy choices among their peers. And we are here to support that and to provide training and guidance to those young people. And we're happy to be here. So that's just our little spiel about the 2P program and the other services that the students have access to as part of this program. But I'm now going to pass it over to Paulina, and she's going to get us started with the actual vaping prevention presentation. So thank you all for being here once again, and I'll turn it over to Paulina.
Thank you so much, Stephen, and thank you all for having me this evening. Before we start, and you might have seen my moving forward from here very quickly, I do want to roll into affirmations, but I first want to kind of set the stage as to when we're learning about tobacco prevention, or honestly any prevention topic, it's normal to be curious. It's normal to wonder and start having thoughts. Has my child thought about this? How much do they know about this? And all of those thoughts are okay. And I welcome any questions in the Q&A. I have it popped open. I'm ready to reflect on them and answer as best that I can. But also know that as we're giving this information, there's a lot of different information that you can take home. And we're hoping to give you skills to really implement in the home. And when you do that, you know your family best. And I really want you to think from a lens of what is something that really matches our culture in our house, or what is a way that I can really take this and make this our own and implement it so it's more natural. So with that said, I do want us to get excited for new information. Be engaged. I encourage you to use the Q&A when you can. And I'll go ahead and move forward. And as I mentioned, first, I like to start off with affirmations. I normally have this in a meeting setting, so I get to hear and see you all responding, and it's completely okay if you're not. But I do ask that you at least take the affirmation in. An affirmation is a statement that we take and we own, and we're saying it to make, in hopes of making it either our reality or just accepting that it's our reality. It's okay if you're there or if you're not. So I will be reading our affirmations for parents out loud. Feel free to repeat it out loud if you're in a space that allows you to. If you're not, just say it in your head. Take what works, and it's okay if you don't take them all. So our first one, I am resilient. I am doing the best I can for my child. I am confident and always growing as a parent. I focus on progress, not perfection. My mental and physical health matters as much as my child's. I have many skills to overcome anything that is thrown my way. I am ready to listen with an open heart and mind. And with that abrupt switch, sorry about that. I hope there was something from those affirmations that you take, that you accept, and it helps kind of set the stage for as we move forward. Because in this workshop, we are going to focus on the basics of vaping, how to prevent risky behavior, and I'll touch on mental wellness and how it relates to vaping. I invite you to ask the questions. I normally, again, if this was a meeting setting, I would ask us to share our experiences. If you want to within your question, feel free. I'll hopefully be able to read it if it comes through, and I'll also suggest resources. So let's start off with the basics of vaping. Vaping consists of these two things. There's normally a heating element, which is typically a battery, and that battery heats up an e-liquid. And when that e-liquid is heated up, it gets turned into an aerosol. And that aerosol is what's being taken in by the user and is what's being exhaled by the user. So vaping is the general term that's used for the action of this, but the devices can also be referred to as e-cigarettes, e-cigs, vapes, Juuls are the more common ones, references. And there are different types of vaping devices. And vaping began in this era where they were used as a cessation tool for those that wanted to quit smoking. So as you can see, it started off as what was referred to as a cig-alike, because it was very much like a cigarette. And those components that I previously mentioned, the heating element, so the battery, the e-liquid, and the aerosol that's created is all taking place within the cig-alike, except it looks like a cigarette. And again, the intention was to help those that were trying to quit smoking to slowly lower the amount of nicotine they were taking in, and they would control that through the e-liquid, and in hopes that it would help them ease off and quit smoking. But vaping has evolved, and that hasn't quite been the case among the tobacco industry. And now we see many different types of vaping devices. So I'll start on the left-hand side. You'll see that there are vape pens. Very much takes the shape of a regular pen that you may have around. This is a pen, not a vape pen. You can see that they have they're different sizes somewhat in length, but they have different colors. They're bright, they're attractive. They definitely blend in with the school supply. The second one is a tanker mod. The picture doesn't quite reflect it completely accurately. It is a bit bigger than what it might look like, but they're a bit thicker, as you can see. And yeah, those were bigger. And then the third ones are pod mods. They have a few different shapes to them. There's a Seren Air, and a regular bar. And as you can make do as to what they look like to you, to me, it almost looks like a highlighter or a little mini calculator and a USB drive. Those were popular, but now we see trending upward are the disposables. And that's what we have as the very last one that are listed here. It takes a similar shape as our pod mod right here, except this is meant for it to be used and then disposed of, versus in these you would refill with either a new pod or insert more of that e-liquid that was mentioned. Now, I do want to talk about disposables just a little bit more, just because of their growth and popularity. They do take, again, the very bright colors. They're very attractive. They come in different colors. They might come in more reflective colors. They're very sweet. As you can see right here, they're already trying to market the flavor that's behind it. The first one is a pink lemonade one, and they all come in different flavors, which we'll talk about a bit later. But the big pieces here about these disposables are that they're extremely affordable. And I highlight that because when a device is extremely affordable, when anything is essentially extremely affordable, it becomes much easier for a young person to be able to gather the money together and purchase it, or even find someone to purchase it so they can have the device. So yeah, when something is about like $7, it becomes much easier to just access in general. And last but not least these come with a much higher nicotine delivery, and many of these utilize nic salt, which is a form of the nicotine that delivers at a much stronger rate, but it also delivers much more smoothly. And so that's what makes what would make these much more attractive than those other devices that were used or shown. And I do want to break down what these e-liquids that are inside them are all about. So on the left-hand side, we have a typical e-liquid, which typically contains the nicotine. It contains the artificial flavoring, and it contains either propylene glycol, so PG, or vegetable glycerin, VG. And something important to note here is, aside from nicotine, which many of us may already know is extremely addictive in general, are the artificial flavorings. And artificial flavors are known to be totally fine. I like to always say, if you have or eat a Starburst, you're likely going to have artificial flavoring in there, or I guarantee you will, and that's okay to ingest. But when the e-liquid goes through the heating process, the chemicals are broken apart and it no longer becomes an okay thing to be ingesting. You're not supposed to be inhaling these artificial flavors because of the new chemical compounds that it creates. On the flip side, these e-liquids can also contain cannabis. So it can either have THC, which would be the element that creates the high for the young person, or CBD. So I have here, and I'm going to just give a pause for a moment, but I want you to just quiz yourself. You don't have to answer it anywhere, but I will give a few seconds. And I want you to try to identify as many vape devices or what would the word be? Accessory, if you will, for a vape device that you can identify on the screen. And then I will show you the answers, and you can just compare to yourself, all of this to yourself, if you got many answers correct. So try to identify as many vape devices or accessories as you can. All right, let me show the answers. And if you found all 7, kudos to you. I'll start with number 1. It is one of our syringes, and as you can see, number 2 I really wanted to highlight was the e-liquid that is or will refill some of the devices. The rest that are shown on the screen are actual devices. So you have one that looks very much like the USB that's connected and is charging for use on the laptop. You have, I'll move around the screen. So you have the puff bar, which is bright yellow, straight in the middle. Number 7 is another one that like I mentioned, looks very much like the calculator that is located right next to it. You have another stizzy, which typically contains THC, and it takes a similar form of number 3 that is charging when it's completely extended. And number 4 on the screen is a vape pen that is blending with the pens on the screen. So let's dive into some health risk and why we're concerned about these vape devices overall. Typically, I would give this as a quiz. If you want to try to quiz yourself and you want to place it in the Q&A, I can read it and can or throw answers in the chat, and I can absolutely try to tell you if you're correct or not. But I'll move forward semi-quickly just in case it's a little bit difficult to access. So first question, in the United States, what percentage of adults who smoke daily started by the age of 18? Is it A, 25%, B, 40%, C, 66%, or D, 88%? I'm giving just a few extra seconds in case someone wants to. Oh, it looks like you will all have to place it in the Q&A if you want to respond. So far, no responses, so I will move forward, but feel free to use the Q&A moving forward. The answer was D, 88%. So 68% continue to smoke despite wanting to quit, and teens who vape are 3 to 4 times as likely to start smoking. We really highlight this. Oh, I see someone actually answered it. Thank you so much. And you got the correct answer. We highlight this because, and we will highlight it again later on, but tobacco companies are well aware, and there's documentation to show that that they are aware that the younger that a young person is that begins smoking, the more susceptible they are to become more dependent on the device or the nicotine and want more and more. All right, so it looks like Q&A is working, so feel free to answer the questions through there. Next question is, the amount of nicotine in disposable vapes is equal to how many cigarettes? Is it A, 1, B, 5, C, 10, or D, 20? I'll give a few seconds. The answer is D. It is over 20 cigarettes. So this is a Bang XL and vape and contains 2% milliliters of 6% nicotine liquid, or as what we would simply say is 120 milligrams of nicotine. One cigarette typically contains 1 milligram of nicotine each. So as you can see, the bang in it of itself, it has as equals, we would say 120 cigarettes. And also, just to touch on those vapes that do contain THC, it's really important to reflect on the THC levels that were, or what was being delivered within a device in 1995 versus now. And as you can see, in 1995, the amount was at 4%, and that grew by 2014. But these devices are so potent and powerful, they're delivering at an 82%. Next question, feel free to answer in the Q&A. At the average age of 25, the brain is fully developed. Which area of the brain is the last to develop? Is it A, the amygdala, B, the prefrontal cortex, C, the temporal lobe, or C, the cerebellum? This one's a tricky one, so I don't blame you if you take a little bit of time. Forward. The answer is B, the prefrontal cortex. Now let me go into why this is important within all of this. So around the age of 25 is when this prefrontal cortex, so it's actually the front of the brain right here, fully develops. It could be a little younger, it could be a little bit older. It is an average, but that part of the brain controls our logic brain. So that means all of our logical decision making, our controlling of our impulses, the problem solving, our voice of reason isn't fully developed to its full potential until the age of 25. And I say that because before the age of 25, decisions are being made off of, if you can see my mouse, this small area down here. And that's called the amygdala. Not that you're not being quizzed on this, so you don't have to remember these names, but that part of the brain is in charge of our emotions. So when a young person, I'll just throw out an age of 13, is growing, developing, and doesn't quite have that prefrontal cortex developed, they're going to be bouncing a lot from their emotional brain to their logical brain. That's why you don't see, or you might find yourself like, what were you thinking when you either coming across a problem or made a decision that you felt like but had an obvious, clear, safe answer? It's because they're still trying to balance between the two. So to expand on that, the teen brain looks very much like the image on the left-hand side versus the adult brain looks very much like the brain on the right-hand side. Now the left-hand side is a whole lot of freeways, they're crossing, it's messy, but there's tons of possibility. And it's in science, or a little bit more bringing science into this, it's our neurons and our transmitters, and there's tons of ways that it can go. There's tons of things that it hasn't explored yet. And slowly but surely, as we get older, we kind of start getting into our ways and we prune what works for us and what doesn't. And if I'm getting a little bit more into the science of it, when our brain is developing, it naturally, our brain, regardless if we're young or older, will create a chemical called dopamine. Again, you don't have to remember that, but that helps us balance our mood. And when we create that, we learn how much of that dopamine we need, and our brain will naturally decide how much to create or how much not to create. Now, when you add other substances like the nicotine or the THC that's in those devices, that is going to substitute that dopamine and bring those sensations for the young person. So they might feel like, oh, I feel happy, or I feel less stressed is a big portion of the feedback. It's because the brain is being wired to need that chemical in order to feel that way, versus it would have naturally produced it regardless, and especially produces it more when people are doing things naturally that make them happy. For example, some people might say going to the beach makes them happy, a walk outside, exercising, eating healthy food, all of that would have done that as well. So this slide just again highlights one more thing, that nicotine and THC does affect our learning, our attention, and our memory. And studies have numerically shown this, as well as nicotine, when it's used when someone is under stress, becomes especially addictive for that person. Okay, next question is, what is the substance exhaled when vaping? Is it A, vapor, B, aerosol, C, smoke, or D, steam? I gave you this answer earlier, so I will wait and hope that someone has a response. All right, let me give you the answer. The answer is B, aerosol. Now that aerosol is created when that battery heats up that e-liquid, and it has all kinds of different chemicals within it. So we're looking at the nicotine, ultrafine particles, cancer-causing chemicals. It contains heavy metals such as nickel, tin, and lead, volatile organic compounds, and other chemicals that are linked to serious lung disease. So again, that's being inhaled and also exhaled. So the propylene glycol, the vegetable glycerin, and the flavors, as I mentioned earlier, when they're heated up, they no longer become okay to be ingested because they're not meant to be ingested as an aerosol and through our lungs. And they can coil and leach onto the metals, or leach metals onto that e-liquid, which is heated up and then taken in. There's also such thing as secondhand aerosol. So if you've ever heard of secondhand smoke, it's a very similar concept, secondhand aerosol, and has been found to also contain the nicotine, the formaldehyde, aluminum, and other particles. And we share that because, you know, when someone is maybe around someone that's vaping, it can be very difficult to identify, and it also doesn't feel as harsh as something you would breathe in as you would if you pass by someone who might be smoking a traditional cigarette. That would be very noticeable and a very apparent smell, versus this might smell like strawberry lemonade, and someone might think that it's safe because it doesn't seem as, again, harsh as a typical smoke smell would. Okay, next question is, how many e-liquid flavors did researchers find available in a 2017 study? Is it A, over 500? Is it B, 100 to 200? Is it C, 200 to 300? Or is it D, 10 to 50? Just a few seconds in case anyone wants to answer in the Q&A. Let's move forward. The answer is A, and it was 15,586. Now, this was through a study that was conducted in 2017, and I highlight that because it's been a while since it's been 2017, and I share that because this number is probably not accurately reflected anymore and is likely to have grown since then. And something that we do ask ourselves is, and I ask this rhetorically, is who are these products intended for? And when you look at these products and you look at the flavors that are available, you know, you really take in 15,000 flavors. And those are all opportunities to captivate the attention of our young people, as well as if you look at what they are. Vanilla caramel ice cream bites. It tastes like a slushie. It tastes like candy rainbow. I think it's okay to argue, yes, adults love sweets as well, but between the flavors and the colors, it's very, very much going to attract our young people. And it, again, studies or documentation has been there to show that tobacco companies are well aware of that. there's a certain level of greed behind it where it's what's going to make the money and getting those audiences to want the product so they can come back and buy more and more, unfortunately. Next question, true or false? An additive has been found in e-liquids that is linked to severe lung damage. Is it true or is it false? I'll give a few seconds. The answer is true. Oh, I saw an answer in the chat. So the answer is true. It's called EBOLI, and vaping illnesses have been linked to multiple things within the vape devices. One that's kind of been thrown out there through a few of the studies has been vitamin E acetate. And there's also studies that have really been looking at the counterfeit products that are out there, especially with things not being regulated. It's, as these are mentioning, there's contamination within the devices, within the cannabis that have been used within the devices, and has caused some health effects as well. Okay. Next up, I do want to take a quick pause just to see, this was a lot of information to be taken in. So I do want to pause and give an opportunity for people to put in the Q&A what if anyone has any questions regarding the information or wants me to expand on any of those points. But I do want to reassure that we have more to the presentation, and next up are prevention strategies. So things that you can implement within your home and hopefully just help prevent usage altogether. So again, feel free to place in the Q&A. I'm going to be looking to see if any of our interpreters have received any feedback, but I will wait about 30 seconds. I'm very comfortable with silence. Alrighty, I'm getting feedback that there aren't any. Even if I move forward, if anyone does have any questions or anything pops up, feel free to put it in the Q&A. And if we answer it while I'm going, awesome. If not, I'll be sure to answer it at the very end of the presentation. Alrighty, so next up, I don't want to give you the answer yet. Next up are prevention strategies, and these are things that you can implement in your home that will prevent any risky behavior in general. So I'm speaking on vape use, obviously, but this can help deter all kinds of risky behavior. Our first tip is be there for your child and engage with their schoolwork, interest, and activities. Now, that does mean asking questions, showing that true, genuine interest in what they're doing and how their day went, asking those follow-up questions. But all of this, and I put that in like your sub-Q hint, is to watch for dramatic changes, because you know your family best, you know your child best, you know what's normal for them, and you know when they're being off. And you know you can pick up on that even more quickly the more engaged you are with what they're involved in. So I like to give the example that if you know that your child is extremely out there and extroverted, super social, and there's suddenly a 180 and they become very introverted, don't want to leave the house much, seem to be to themselves, even with you, and they normally aren't like that, that is a clue that you can look into it further. And I always emphasize that does not mean that they're using. It's just a clue that something may be up and that it's worth looking further into. Our second hint is to model responsible attitudes and behaviors around alcohol, medicine, and stress management. And to reflect on our sub hint is to reflect on your own stress management strategies and stay open to adapting new techniques to your current practices. Now, we say all of this because what you model, regardless of the age of your child, they are still sponges, whether they're 5 years old or they're 17 years old. And I know the closer we get to 17, the more you're seeing that rebellion stages, and that's completely normal from young people. But even if they seem like they're not paying attention, they are paying attention, and they are more likely to fall back on the behaviors and your management skills and use those skills themselves before they do something else. So it's very important. Just reflect on your own. If there's something you want to change that you hope they don't repeat, I say that's your cue to focus on that or work on that. But also always be open to adapting the new techniques, because there's always something that we can always grow and adapt, and hope that our young people will adapt as well. All right, so number 3 is to get to know your child's friends and to talk about peer pressure and friendship. And I want to emphasize again here, this is truly about genuinely being interested in your young person's life, and that includes their friendships. And especially with friendships and teen friendships, that might be something that goes over our heads or we don't get as involved with. Super kudos if you do, I'm very proud. But the more genuine interest that we have with their friends, so I always use the example friend name of Sally. Let's say I ask how Sally has been doing today out of genuine curiosity, and my child were to respond, oh, they're doing great. Awesome. I might ask some follow-up questions, but then if I notice that there's any changes within my child or an influence change between what Sally's doing and what my child might be curious about, when I ask about that, there is more they're more receptive to what you're asking and don't feel like you're necessarily accusing them or honing in on them suddenly. And I say that because if we didn't have this genuine interest, that might cause them to shut down when you start having those concerns. Versus if you were genuinely interested before, that shutdown is typically not there. Number 4 is to establish clear rules and fair consequences. So here we emphasize to know the who, what, when, and where. And one thing, aside from just really emphasizing what your boundaries are, what you expect from your young person while they're living in your home or under your care, when they know that there's a boundary, they know if they're crossing it or not. And I share that because in the previous example, I shared how normal it is during the teen years for young people to start pushing boundaries. That is absolutely normal in their social development. Now, they can't push boundaries if there aren't any, or if they're unsure if it's a boundary. And my colleague had shared with me, and it's such a great point because I had noticed it as well, that when you ask young people, you know, like, how do you feel if your parent didn't give you rules? And they say, oh, well, so-and-so's parents kind of like that. And it kind of seems like they just don't care about them. And that's not, I'm sure, what the intention is, but they do feel that there's a great connection and that sense of care when there are boundaries placed. So don't be afraid to set those boundaries, set those rules and the consequences, and just be clear and follow through with them. Lastly, we asked or suggest to talk regularly about the risk of tobacco, alcohol, and drugs. And it is very common and a myth out there for people to think or wonder, if I start talking about these things, that means that I'm going to introduce it to them if they weren't already. And then they're going to become more curious and want to just maybe try it. And studies have nonstop shown that that is actually not the case. And by talking about it regularly and very much stating where you are and what your values are behind these things, it creates a safer space for them to come to you when they do want to talk about the risk of alcohol, tobacco, and drugs. And they're more likely to come to you and get the more accurate information versus that more inaccurate or very full of myths, if you will, information that they might get from their peers. Our sub hint here is to use teachable moments to start the conversation. One of my big examples for that is, let's say you were after this presentation or like a few days down the line, you go to the grocery store. And let's say you happen to pass by a tobacco counter and you see a vape device behind there. You might find the opportunity to say, hey, I just learned about those. That's a vape device. Did you know that? Do you know about these? And that's a way to kind of bring up the conversation, genuinely just ask if they know about it or if they've ever heard about it. And it doesn't accuse them. It's very natural and it's just more matter of fact. And if they say, oh yeah, I think we've had a presentation on that too before, or if they say, no, I don't think I've seen that before. Either way, it's your cue so that you can further share more information on what you learned today. And that can kind of start those conversations, and you can also start where your boundaries are with these topics, if you have figured them out already. Okay. Again, in our typical meeting setting, I would ask this open-endedly and have some engagement, but feel free to answer this in the Q&A if you have an answer. Of those 5 prevention strategies, what did you find most difficult? And by most difficult, like what do you feel would be harder to implement in your home? And was there one that seemed really easy, or maybe you're already implementing it? Feel free to share that. So again, in the Q&A, if there's anything that stood out to you, I'll give a few seconds of an opportunity for people to respond before I move forward. I'll give just a few more seconds. Okay, I will move forward. I'm going to check the time really quick. Okay, this has been quite a lot of information. So this is our last section. I do want to share that before I open it up to Q&A and share resources. So I do want to share, I will breeze through this. This is very much more informational than anything else. But again, take it in, take in what works for you. And I know I'm going to go a bit fast, but if you have any questions on this section, feel free to ask it in the Q&A. I want to make sure I leave time at the very end in case anything pops up overall. Okay, let me talk about mental wellness and why I'm including this first though. So there has been a huge correlation between mental health and vape use, and it goes both ways between a student's mental wellness. So there's tons of feedback that or responses that they use to either help with stress or to cope with it. And so we see a connection there, but there is also an importance behind our parents and just making sure that we're all taking care of our mental wellness, kind of touching back on modeling these behaviors. Let me move forward just to talk about what is mental wellness or mental health in general, just in case this is new information for you. So mental health is referring to our emotional, psychological, and social well-being. It impacts how we relate to others and how we manage stress and make decisions. Our mental health impacts our physical health and vice versa. So if we're not feeling great with our mental health, it can affect how we feel very literally physically, or if we're in pain or even have any form of just physical restraint, it can impact how our mental health is feeling and how we're feeling about ourselves overall. So student mental wellness, where does this fit in with vaping? It fits in a few different areas. I know I touched a little bit before, but if you remember this slide from earlier, our brain, or the young person's brain, is developing until the age of 25. So it's really starting to learn, again, how to control their impulses, how to make rational decisions, how to logically problem solve, and to really have that voice of reason to help calm them and regulate them. And that's important because, again, when we introduce those chemicals, it's going to impact how our brain is wiring, and it's also going to impact our overall mental health. So, for example, let's just say our brain learns not so great coping skills, whether that means it was introduced to nicotine, so it becomes a bit dependent on it, or it means that it learned it could mean other things other than alcohol or tobacco use. It could mean things such as you learn, oh, I love, or when I, it's a good one. I'm trying to think of like a good physical one. This is an extreme one, but like if I punch the wall, I feel better. That's not necessarily your best response or healthiest response, but it's wiring the brain to know what's working for it and what's not. And we know that there are alternative options, but we need to make sure that we're teaching that and practicing that so our brain can learn that there are better and more healthier options to manage our stress and to manage other conflict. Another thing is that our young people are developing socially. And earlier I had talked about how it's completely natural for young people to start pushing boundaries at that older teen age. And that is true. And it's important to think of what are those other things that are being impacted as they develop socially. So one, peer relationships become a central focus during teen years. So that means that when they're growing, they're very much focused on their caregivers, their families that they're surrounded by, and suddenly they want to hang out with their friends all the time as they get older. And that's completely normal. But as you can see, that's what leaves room for those influences and navigating those influences, whether they're positive or negative. Which also means that the adult caregiver relationships still remain important. Now, that's important to remember because it's not going to be very obvious. As I mentioned, it might be that your young person wants to hang out with their friends all the time. So it might be easy to assume, oh, they don't really care about hanging out with us anymore. But that relationship is vital, especially as they're learning at this new phase and era of life and all of those conflicts and learning how to deal with things logically. Third, adolescents begin identity formation. So they learn who they are, what makes them them, and that can be very stressful. That's where they start feeling the peer pressure as to, oh, do I want to fit in and I need to fit in, and then start switching that brain into, oh, wait, but this is more me. It's a process for them, and it's very hard and it's very stressful. And again, that leaves room for those not so great coping mechanisms. But if they have a great adult or caregiver relationship with someone, they could learn healthier coping mechanisms. And the fourth point we want to highlight is that social media does factor into their social development in terms of it's a way for them to feel and stay connected to their peers, which we know is important to them now. And it also provides that validation. Now, social media, as we may know already, can take a not so awesome turn because it has those other influences there, but it's also a big part of what's making their experience, what's making them feel connected. So something to consider as we're thinking about what are they going through, what are these stresses, and where are they getting these messages and influences from? Because there's quite a few different opportunities as to where they're getting these different messaging or messages. So just to highlight, they are experiencing outside pressure and inside pressure. Outside pressure looks like their friends and their classmates and getting that validation, their family and the expectations, media and advertising, and that can be very not as obvious sometimes with social media posting and how that works, as well as society and their environment and just what's accepted in general and what isn't accepted. Inside pressure, they're really thinking about, again, they want that acceptance and feeling accepted. They're dealing and learning how to balance stress and emotions. They're experiencing lots of boredom and dealing with their curiosity within that boredom. And again, that's what might be leading to, or where they need to learn to navigate those other external pressures that might be pressuring to do some not so great things. And fourth, they are learning their independence, and they will be showing some rebellion and learning what's making them them and what's not. And sometimes they won't mold to everything we hope they would, but it's because they're learning their own identity. Okay. Last piece of this is parent wellness. Like, where does that fit in with students and vaping? And I really want to reflect that a lot of this is really just going back to modeling those behaviors and knowing what's healthy and what's unhealthy. So when a young person is navigating those obstacles that I mentioned in those previous slides, they will be looking at and modeling some of the behaviors that their parents or caregivers have been modeling. So if their parent doesn't have some stress coping mechanisms, even if it doesn't necessarily mean that there's nothing unhealthy going on, it's important for the parent to know what to fall back on and model so their young person starts to learn how to grasp and practice it themselves. I'll expand on that a little bit more as we move forward. All of this, or parent wellness, is important because how we feel impacts how we interact with our loved ones. It impacts how we handle our own stress. It impacts how we view ourselves. It impacts how we use or don't use coping skills to regulate ourselves. And I'll touch on that a little bit more in a second. And it impacts how we engage in our environments. I really want to hop back into that fourth point. So it impacts how we use or don't use coping skills to regulate ourselves. Sometimes that regulate part can seem a little off-putting, but I really want to emphasize that all that means or can mean is that, let's say your young person really says something that just really irritates you. And it might be that they're talking back or they're pressing a button that they know they're pressing because they're really pushing their boundaries on a certain day. You may know how to regulate yourself internally so you don't display a certain behavior or a certain reaction that you hope they wouldn't display. And that might be something you already practice. But let's just say you just know what that little button pushing either sentence or phrase is, and it's hard to regulate. Regulating is completely okay, normal, and it's important to know when we need to regulate and find those coping, that's just kind of like a coping skill that helps us de-escalate our emotions so we can handle a situation with a more just logic brain and logic based. Hope that's not too much information, it makes sense, but it's important back because we want to model these behaviors as best we can for our young people. Oh, that was our last slide, but I do want to emphasize that all in all, and part of our affirmation is that the mental well-being and health of our adults, of our families, our parents, our caregivers is just as important as our child. So I do encourage self-care. So that means practicing and of taking an active role in protecting one's own well-being and happiness. So doing things that make you happy, that bring you peace and make you calm. And it's truly just about your happiness. And it's okay to tend to that as well, because our young people will then learn how to tend to their own and learn different skills on what that looks like. Alrighty, I'm going to move through our additional resources here. So these are all available for you to explore. I really encourage you to take note if anything stands out for you. So Know the Risk is a website, and if you type that in, it can give you different facts about e-cigarettes and young people, different influences, and again, a lot of what we pulled can be found and reflected in here as well. There's our also Partnership for Drug-Free Kids. This is a great resource, but it also has a marijuana talk kit. It has different talk kits, so it allows you to expand on these conversations and learn how to talk about it. Even if your young person might be using, it can help you navigate certain conversations and give you tips on that as well. So drugfree.org would be the website for that. And I always encourage for our Orange County residents, there is 1-866 New Lung. And by accessing 1-866 New Lung, so you can call them, they also have a website, but they have free tobacco cessation services for OC residents. So anyone that's trying to quit, it's not just for students, it can be for any adult in the home. Feel free to contact them, and they have so many different ways of giving you that information and the skills needed to do so. I also want to highlight our Reset Toolbox, and our Reset Toolbox is something that we created that touches on mental health and social emotional learning, but we have 1 hour self-paced, we call them courses or modules that help parents, but there's also some courses for students, that focus on just overall mental health, social emotional well-being, learning a bit about young people's mental health as well. So I highly encourage you to explore these. You can find these at resettoolbox.com. I also have these links, so I'll let your counselors or administrators from the district share them where they see it fit. But there are modules specifically for parents. You go at your own pace. It's available in 6 different languages. Among those are English, Spanish, Arabic, Korean, Farsi, and I will always miss one. There's one more that I can't think of, but it is available.
Vietnamese.
Oh, what was it?
Vietnamese.
Vietnamese, thank you. Like my conscience is talking. And so it is available for our parents as well. Again, there's also student courses. I only linked our parent courses here, and there are also courses for our school educators, if that's of interest. Alrighty. I'm gonna open it up for Q&A. So any questions that you may have, feel free to throw them in the chat or the Q&A box. I will be looking at that. I'm open to answer anything that you have. I also want to move forward. I'm going to exit this so I can grab the link for you. But so I can keep giving presentations and building presentations that best benefit you all, I do ask if you have 5 minutes, if a post survey can be taken. I am going to share, oh, I can't share it in the chat. Go through the chat. This is the link. It takes about 5 minutes to complete. It is pretty quick, I would say. It could be even less. But if you have 5 minutes, please, 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 just share your feedback and let us know if there's any areas we can grow in with this presentation. But while you do that, I will just have it open for Q&A. I'm here to answer any questions that I can, or even if our administrators have any questions, I'm happy to expand on items as well.
While we wait for some people to put any information or questions in the Q&A, I just want to thank Stephen and Pauline again, and thank all of our parents for attending tonight. And again, keep posting in the Q&A, but we want to thank you for attending because Ocean View does value student wellness, and we value our partnership with you. So we appreciate parents coming tonight to learn about vaping and how much you support your students. So we appreciate that. If you have any additional questions after tonight you think of later, you can reach out to your principal and they'll connect you with the people with the appropriate answers. But go ahead and continue putting anything in the Q&A for our speakers. Oh, that's helpful, Stephen. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Stephen. And thank you, Christy, for putting that in the Q&A as well. And just to highlight, if you haven't seen, Stephen is putting the links that were shared for the different resources into the chat box. So if you click on those, it'll take you directly to one of the links that you were interested in.
Okay, thank you. We have a survey completed that lets us know they completed a survey, so thank you.
Thank you.
And there's still more resources in the chat, so thank you, Stephen.
I'll add that I just dropped one more in there, that graphic from earlier showing the desk with the different devices on it. If you found that interesting and you think other parents or other adults that you know would be interested in learning more, you can follow that link. You can share that link with them. And when you go in there, it's interactive and you can click around. You guess how many devices. Well, you all know the answer is 7 now. But if you go in there, it does have a brief explanation of each device. So even if someone you know couldn't attend it tonight, they could still get some value out of that, so they could see some of these devices that are so easy to conceal. And that can also start a conversation, and you can share with them some of the things that you've learned this evening. So that's, I think, the last link that I'll put in there in the chat.
I see another survey was completed. Thank you so much for doing that.
Stephen and Paulina, I want to thank you again for all of your time tonight, your expertise. I know our parents got a lot of great information, have a lot to go home and share with their students. So we really appreciate that. Thank you so much. Still looking to see if there's any other questions. Surveys finished in the Q&A. If not, again, parents, thank you so much for coming tonight, taking the time out of your evening to join us, support your students, and learn a lot about vaping from our experts. We appreciate it.
Thank you, everybody. Have a good night.